Yes, yes. Once again, we are here. Another episode of Green's House. I am your host, Jericho Green. People, you know how we do. I sit down with amazing people with an interesting story to tell, a wide variety of people. And today, I got a good one. I had the pleasure of meeting this man a couple years ago in Dallas, Texas at the Uncle Tom 2 premiere. He's many things, but a few of the things that he is: a politician, a documentarian, father, husband, star, and producer of Uncle Tom and Uncle Tom 2, a business owner, and an American. Ladies and gentlemen, put your hands together for Mr. Chad O. Jackson.
Hello, hello, hello. Thank you,
Hey, man.
thank you, Jericho, for having me,
Hey,
and
thanks for being here. I
thank
really
you for your
appreciate you.
service too.
Hey, no problem. It was a pleasure. You know, it's funny when people say thank you for your service. I can only imagine because I did serve, so I am a veteran, so I don't know what it's like to have not served. But I imagine that people have an image in their mind of somebody who served, and
Hmm.
I laugh because yes, we served our country. We went to dangerous places in the world, but we did a lot of messing around too. We really did.
Oh, of course,
Yeah.
of course.
We worked hard, and boy, did we play hard.
Do you know
But
who?
thank you, man.
Do you know who Sturgill Simpson is? Or is
No,
it Sturgill Simpson? He's a country music artist, and he has a song called "Sea Stories." I think he was in the Navy. Um, but in it, he ends the song by saying, I forget exactly how he worded it, but buying time beats dying for lies in a politician's war or something like that. Anyway, I don't know why I brought that up, but it's funny because sometimes people ask me like, "Hey, my son is about to go. He's trying to figure out what he wants to do. He's about to graduate high school. I don't know if he should join the military because they'll go off and they'll fight in wars that some politician or Congress or whomever uh, uh, got us into, not for the prosperity and longevity of our country, but rather for their own interests. Do you think
hmm
that they should go, or what?" And I say, look, I'm not going to tell you one way or the other. Um, but if you genuinely feel that where we are in this space of the 21st century is such to where we are increasingly becoming a more and more corrupt regime as far as our politicians are concerned, then maybe encourage them to join some kind of militia or something of that matter or of that nature that actually aligns with what your values are. If you believe that our politicians are running afoul of the Constitution, and your your son is a patriotic person who wishes to preserve and conserve the Constitution, and they feel that this local militia does a better job than that, than those who are running our military, then just have that kind of conversation with them. But that's just me. You asked my opinion, and there it is. But I haven't served, so I can't really. I don't know. Far be it from me to try to um, opine on whether somebody should join the military or not. So.
Well, you could still have that opinion. My dad used to always say, "You don't have to bite the donut to know it's sweet." If you
Mhm.
have common sense and you're able to think for yourself, then yeah, you can discern whether or not our military is a good option, depending on the level of corruption in our
Mhm.
government. And it's really a shame that a word like militia has to be brought back, because when you hear a militia, like in the Constitution, a well-regulated militia, that's an old
Mhm.
word for old
Right.
times. We don't
Mhm.
need a militia anymore. We have technology, and we have new stuff, and we have we're better than that, right? We're
Right.
different human beings. We don't need a
And militias
militia
are white
anymore.
supremacists, mind you.
Oh man, the list under the umbrella of white supremacists has grown over the years. You and I are white supremacists. Larry Elder is a white
Yeah, he's the black
supremacist.
face of
So
white supremacy.
yeah, so that definition has really changed over the years. It used to be reserved for actual white supremacists or white supremacist groups, but like you said, if you run afoul of their script, then you can be painted as a white supremacist, even though you're not white or a supremacist.
Last I checked.
Man, I got HD cameras, man. You're still not white. And
What a mess.
it's ridiculous. All right, sir. I really appreciate you being here. So let's get this started, huh?
Oh, and by the way, I'm not a politician. I don't know where you got that from, but
well, I only say that because you ran for office. I only say it because of that. Nothing.
Okay.
No, not a
No,
a
you're trying to that was a dig. No, I'm not a politician. Yeah, back when I was naive and young, I was 25 years old, and I called myself trying to run for state representative here in Texas. But yeah, those days are long behind me, and
How was that
I have no
process?
interest in. It was interesting. It was interesting. I ran as a Republican. I no longer consider myself to be a Republican, but that's neither here nor there. That's not to say I'm a Democrat. Last thing I'll be is a Democrat. I'm nonpartisan at this stage in my political evolution, but that process, man, was interesting because you get an inside scoop into how party politics works. You get a feel of what the actual interest of the political parties are. They're not genuinely interested in doing what they say they are going to do on the campaign trail. A lot of these politicians, a lot of them are bought and paid for. They're mere puppets who are being utilized, and they know it, in a globalist agenda. They are more beholden to their donors and lobbyists than they are to the grassroots. I think that people get it confused, and they think that the values of the politicians are the same as the values of the grassroots. These are the people who show up to the meetings, who knock doors, who have a genuine concern for the direction we're going in as a country. And they do a lot of stumping for these politicians, thinking that they're going to get in office and do something. And that's not the way that it works at all. I believe that a politician, or I should say a candidate, I think that a candidate should be selected in the same way that a police department chooses a police chief, somebody who has demonstrated by virtue of their own merit that they are capable of leading. Politicians and elections don't work that way. A person who is groomed to meet a certain end is selected, and this person has a lot of money that's put behind them to run for office and win. They know the right things to say because these are things that are very there's a lot of time and interest put into understanding what the sentiments of the public are. And so they are trained to speak to those sentiments, to pinch those grievances, to say what needs to be said, to win the votes, because elections are a battle for numbers. And to the extent that you win the election, you get into office, and the people think that, oh, here's a person who's going to fight for my behalf. But, oftentimes what ends up happening is people, once the polls closed, the doors are closed, everybody goes their separate ways. Nobody pays attention to what's actually going on in Congress or what's actually going on in their state legislative bodies. And what is actually going on in their state legislative bodies and in Congress is more usurpation of our freedoms, an ever expansive government that grows all the more. At this point, we are a runaway train as far as our government's concerned. More bureaucracy, more federal departments. We shouldn't have a Department of Education. We shouldn't have a Department of Energy. We shouldn't have any of this stuff. It's completely unconstitutional, but people don't care because they don't know. They just don't know. So again, the whole thing is a game. And for me, I could never be in elected office because of kind of things that I say, some might consider to be controversial or third rail. It's just not within the Overton window. And that goes for both the right and the left. It's just not within the Overton window of how people think and how they've been conditioned to think. And so someone who says the things that I say could never win elected office. And so that's why I say I was naive to think that I could run and win. because it doesn't work that way. I was very disillusioned by the um, the Republican Party and what their interests are. So
Mhm.
to your question of what did I learn, I think that's it.
Now, do you think, I follow some guys on social media who were in prison and they've turned their life around. I've never been in prison, but
Yeah.
their story is interesting, and
Are
to
you
see
sure?
what they,
You're black. Of course you've been in prison.
well, not yet. I'm still here. You never know. Some celebs out there say that we're being hunted, so maybe my number will be called, and I'll go on the inside. But so far so good. So far, mutual respect and treating officers with respect when I have an interaction with them, which is rare. That served me well. I haven't been on the
Yeah.
inside yet, but some
Right.
people who have,
Yeah.
a lot of one of the common questions they get from people who've never been in is, can I go in, if I go into prison, can I just keep my head down and do my time? And what they always tell these guys is no, because
Hmm.
if something kicks off, it's usually race based. So if something kicks off with your people, you have to get involved. If somebody comes up to you to check you, to test your mettle, to see what you're about, you have to get down. So I say that to say this: do you think that it's possible for somebody to get into politics and actually do good, or once you're inside of that machine, you go along with what they tell you, you start reading from that script? Or can somebody get in there and do some good and actually do what their constituents want them to do?
The answer to that question is yes. Um, Although I can count on one hand the number of people who are currently in office at the federal level who are actually doing uh, positive things in terms of rolling back government bureaucracy and staying true to the edicts of the Constitution. Um, I think as far as politicians are concerned, uh, I'm a fan of people like Barry Goldwater, the late Barry Goldwater, who was a senator from Arizona. I think he's the best president we never had. Um, what's a shame about him is um, his campaign suffered the sophisticated and elaborate schemes of the communist backed Democrats. That is to say, that one thing that communists are really good at is it is basically burying their political opponents by using pejoratives and slogans and things of this nature. They would use words like, ultra conservative and far
Mhm.
right extremists and things of this nature to such an extent that it made not only leftists uncomfortable, but also Republicans uncomfortable. Um, and here was a person who voted against the Civil Rights Act of 1964, rightly so. One of the very few politicians to do this, um, on the basis that it's unconstitutional. And I know we're going to get into that later in the show, but uh, he was a man who stood on principle. And I would say that Rand Paul is one of the ones who stands on principle today. For example, when you look at this new bill that they're pushing called the AM Radio in Every Vehicle Act. Now, a lot of people might say, well, that sounds like a good thing. AM radio, you have a lot of conservative voices, you have a lot of um, of positive things with AM radio. We should have that in every vehicle. Well, that might be your feeling, but at the same time, to the extent that we give the government the power and the control to tell us a business how they must operate, what they must put in their cars, this, that, and the third, where does it end? Now, as a business owner myself, albeit a small business, um, I don't I don't support government overreach into the marketplace because to the extent that I say, yeah, do this thing that I like because I like AM radio, who's to say that you're not creating the precedents for the government to later on do something that affects my business? And so I say the government shouldn't have any kind of involvement at all in the free market, because to the extent that the government and injects itself in the free market, we're well on our way to a communist state, because anyone who knows anything about communism knows that communists are antithetical to the free market. They're antithetical to private ownership of business, private ownership of goods and services, private ownership of property. And so for a government to expand itself all the more and its involvement in the free market, you're well on your way to dictatorship. So when you look at that AM vehicle or AM radio in every vehicle act, people like Ted Cruz and your other so-called conservatives were fighting for this alongside your more liberal senators. Rand Paul was a lone senator who was against it, and he made the very argument that I'm making. Where does it end? Where does this government overreach end? And when you look at the car manufacturers who are taking AM radio out of vehicles, they're only doing it for electric vehicles. And so not only are people like Cruz fighting for this legislation, they are also backing this push to subsidize the purchasing of electric vehicles. And so when you look at the percentage of the population who are actually buying electric vehicles compared to those who aren't, the fact is those of us who aren't are having to front money for those who are. And so it's like, we're subsidizing as a collective the very few people who are buying these electric vehicles. It shouldn't be that way. Whether it be a subsidy, whether it be hyper taxation, all the things, the government, to the extent that it's put its foot into the matter. Again, we're well on our way to tyranny and government overreach. And so, for that reason, I commend people like Rand Paul who are making the argument for small government, making the case for, getting back to the Constitution, even though he knows he's fighting a losing battle because the overwhelming majority of politicians are bought and paid for.
Yeah, true. And unfortunately, it's true. And it really does. It really does suck. More of the few, the very few, dictating what the rest of us do, or having the rest of us pay for whatever they're doing, like the electric vehicles or whatever they're into. I don't think you should. And I agree 100%. The smaller the government, the better, because they've proven to be incompetent on every level, local, and especially really the higher you go, local, state, federal, the higher you go, the worse it gets. So I'm all for that. So why don't we go back to the beginning, Chad? When, I guess you're a 90s baby, but when and where did you grow up?
Yeah, I was born in 1990 here in Texas. I was born in Fort Worth, Texas, which is in Tarrant County, and grew up in Tarrant County in a town called Mansfield. So I went to school, public school in the 90s, and graduated from high school in 2008 during the so-called housing market crash. So yeah, that's basically when and where I grew up.
And what were you like in high school? Were you an athlete? Music?
I was an athlete. I played running back for our football team, and yeah, I mean, and man's like how I was in high school. I was one of those students who really didn't put my best foot forward as far as my education was concerned. I was a great test taker. I could take a test and pass it, no problem. But I never turned in my assignments or never put in any kind of effort as far as that's concerned. As far as my electives are concerned, I was into media, more specifically video and filmmaking. And so that's what I actually did care about, and would spend time in the media department more so than anything, really apart from football. But looking back on it, it's interesting because I feel that my high school experience is the same as most American students, namely that it's not an environment that encourages academics. It's not an environment that um, that lays the foundation for a solid classical education, which I think is important because to the extent that one gets a classical education and learn how the world works, the hard, solid, fact based way in which the world works. From there, you can then go on to be creative. You can then go on to be a producer, one who produces and all the things. Um, we as a society are becoming more and more fluid as far as our education is concerned, where the student is on the same plane as the educator, which is super problematic. Because how then do you actually learn something if there's no healthy fear of the master or the educator or the teacher? And not only that, but a lot of educators are ill-equipped to teach, and this is certainly the case for my um, educational upbringing. And so, as a student, at least this was the case for me. If you sense that your teacher is like they don't really know as much as they're letting on or what their position requires, you learn to distrust them and you kind of look at your class as kind of a joke. And I think a lot of students they kind of sense that, and so they don't have any interest. And not only that, you have these things called counselors, and
Mhm.
the guidance counselor's job is to prepare the students for their future. um, Not every student should go to college. Some students should get into trades. Some students should, go right to work or whatever. Um, Most women, in my opinion, uh, shouldn't go into the workforce. They should be homemakers. But we are a society that has been crippled by feminism, that has been crippled by the civil rights movement and all these other social justice movements. And as such, this has taken a toll on the kind of education that students are getting today. And so um, I would say that my education was subpar. Um, that graduating class of 2008, we got a subpar education. And this shows in the kind of lives that we live, and the kind of lives that my peers live. The fact that they weren't able to make much or do much with the education they received, it was kind of like going through the motions. Of course, Bush was in office from 2000 to 2008, and he pushed something called the No Child Left Behind Act. And this intensified the kind of passing the students through. So we got the effect of that. So anyway, the kind of I bring that stuff up because it's important. Like, I can't just talk about the kind of student I was without looking at the climate and
Mhm.
um, the environment in which I was educated, if that makes sense.
Definitely. And you mentioned that you own a small business. What type of small business is it?
I own a plumbing company here in Texas.
So what made you go to plumbing? There's other trades to get into. What kind of drew you to that?
Well, so after high school, I went right to work, and I worked for a moving company. Well, it was more of a company where we would deliver furniture parts to people's houses, and we would assemble the furniture in people's houses. And I just took this job as kind of like an off season or whatever until I figured out what I wanted to do. And what I really wanted to do was to go into ministry. I wanted to be a pastor. And the school that I wanted to go to didn't take any kind of like financial assistance, or they didn't have any loans that they offered or anything like that. You have to pay all of the money up front for your tuition. So the what I wanted to do was to go to work and raise enough money to then go back and pay for the tuition. And the job that I had, I was making minimum wage, so I wasn't able to raise the money fast enough. So um, I heard about this plumber's apprenticeship where they started off at $15 an hour, which was a lot of money in 2010, 2009, 2010 when I got into it. And I learned quickly that, if you wanted to keep your job, because they were always having layoffs, if you wanted to keep your job, you actually have to show some interest in not only learning the trade, but being good at what you do. And I found out quickly that plumbing wasn't something that it wasn't just a job. This was actually a career. If you want to be good at what you do, you have to look at it as a career. And so I was getting a raise like every 5 or 6 months because of how much work I was putting in. And I figured, okay, I may as well stick with this. And not only that, but the first job I got as a plumber, as a plumber's apprentice, was at a maximum security jail that they were building, and building a brand new maximum security jail in Fort Worth. And it's a 5-story building. And my job as a plumber's apprentice was to go to each floor and ask each plumbing journeyman what materials they needed for the day. And then I would have to go to the Connex and get those materials and bring them to each journeyman. And doing this every morning, you get to talking to these guys. You're in a all male environment, men who are good at their craft, and each man had different issues and different backgrounds that they were dealing with personally. Some were dealing with drunkenness, some were fighting over custody with for their kids, or going through a divorce, or whatever the case may be. And I would learn things about these guys, and we would have conversations, and I would have a opportunity to minister to them in this environment. And it was natural, it wasn't forced, it was just natural, much like the conversation that you and I are having. And I would bring in scripture, and we would talk about it, and some guys remove the tears sometimes when we would talk. And I found that I don't actually have to go into ministry to be effective. I can actually be in the ditch with other men, talking to them, and this could be a ministry in itself. And so I stuck with the whole plumbing thing and decided not to go into ministry. And 4 years later, I was able to go to Austin, Texas, and take my journeyman test. So I was able to pass that journeyman test with flying colors. And then a year later, I was able to take my master plumbing test and pass that also with flying colors. And as a master plumber in the state of Texas, you're able to start a business. So I started my business when I was 26 years old, and I enjoy it. I enjoy being self-employed. I enjoy being able to uh, take jobs I want, not take jobs I don't want, um, and just have time with my family. So yeah, it's been a blessing for sure.
Wow, that's quick. That's very fast. To have your business started by 26. That's amazing. So what you're saying is hard work, determination, and focus
Yeah,
that can get you anything you want in life. Huh.
yeah. Because I mean, and I forgot to add this. When I did get into the plumber's apprenticeship, I met my then girlfriend, who's now my wife. And before I met her, I wasn't interested in dating or getting married anytime soon. Um, but when I met her and I knew that she was going to be my wife, that's when I began to take my future more seriously, and I knew I needed to do something. So that's another thing that motivated me to get into a trade. Because looking at it, you know, a lot of my friends who were in college, um, they what I realized was that by the time they graduated, they wouldn't have a career that they could get into that would pay them anything special. Whereas, when I was looking and researching trades, I figured, well, wow, these guys, they're able to start their own businesses and make pretty good money. So, positioning my family financially to succeed without having mountains of college debt or whatever the case may be, it seems like trades are the best thing to get into. So that was another thing that motivated me, was the potentiality of starting a family. And and I bring that up because I noticed that a lot of young men today aren't thinking on those terms. There's a sense of entitlement, I think, that came along with growing up in the era in which I grew up, where you believe that you're supposed to, you have a right to housing, you have a right
Mhm.
to all the things, to the degree that you don't necessarily have to put in your, the work to get these things and to achieve these things. And I think that's on purpose. I think that's on purpose that people are being conditioned to think in this way, especially in California, where it seems that homelessness is being incentivized. So why would our government incentivize homelessness? Why would our government incentivize um, people not putting their best foot forward, so to speak? So anyway, I don't mean to get go down that rabbit hole, but yeah, as far as starting a business, like the thing that motivated me was I knew I wanted to start a family.
Yeah, speaking of homelessness, I interviewed the district attorney of Yuba County where I live, and he gave some great insight on why that happens, um, how the police are handcuffed when it comes to dealing with these people when people
Hmm.
call 911, what the police are allowed to do, what they're not allowed to do, where they put these people, and it's crazy, man. And California, speaking of California homelessness, we have a third of the nation's homelessness in one state. There's
Wow,
50, and we have one third of the homeless population right here in California, man. It's insane.
that's
And
crazy.
before we started, I mentioned that I live north of Sacramento, and I go downtown a lot. And you would think that downtown Sacramento, downtown any state capital, you got the Capitol building, you have all these courthouses and all these official buildings with the pillars and the marble and all these opulence. When you go inside, like the state Senate building, it's crazy, man, the way those things are designed. But around the outside of it, disgusting.
Mm.
The homeless people take over entire sections of the sidewalk. So if you're brave enough to walk down that part of the sidewalk where they are, to get around them, you have to step into the roadway. You got to step into the street to get around these people. Now, homelessness is one thing, or unhoused, as they like to say. But when it impedes my travel, when it puts me in danger to get around these people when they're taking over sections of the public, which our tax money goes to, and nobody's more highly taxed than Californians, it's a
Right.
real problem. It's a real problem. I'm not allowed to go out and enjoy the public. I'm not allowed to go out and enjoy places with my family. And as a family man, you understand some of
Hmm.
the best times are just going somewhere with your family. There doesn't have to
Right.
be a trip to a theme park or something like that. Let's just go out. Just being together is
Hmm.
fun, is amazing. And when
Right.
you go out and there's this added level of unnecessary danger, because if people think that these homeless people are just, some winos who hop in a train car from one town to the next and they got the bindle on the stick
Yeah.
and they're
Tramp.
not, man, these people are on drugs and or mental problems. It's insane. So but one of the things that he spoke about, and one of the things I really liked about the interview is that he ended it on a note of hope. There is hope.
Mm.
It can be fixed. You can fix the homelessness problem. You can fix the crime problem, but it's not easy.
Yeah.
Um, so are you a sports fan? Being in Texas, sports is big out there.
I don't have time to be a sports fan, unfortunately. Um, no, I don't have time to be a sports fan. Man, I'm too busy to be paying attention to sports. And not only that, but sports have become so woke these days.
Yeah.
And they're changing a lot of the rules to where I don't know. I have a theory. A lot of people, I shared this theory before, and it was met with a lot of naysayers and pushback, which is fine. But I have a theory that the rules are changing so much as far as sports is concerned, professional sports are concerned, and in, the NCAA, to where is it? Did I use that acronym correctly? NCAA.
College, yeah, NCAA.
Yeah. To where I would venture to say within 10 to 15 years, the rules will be so strenuous that women are going to be able to compete in
Oh,
professional sports.
don't say that.
Um, I think that's the direction that we're going. Like, I mean, if you look at football, where you can hit, how you can hit,
Oh,
things of this nature, is going to be so strenuous and the bar is going to be so low that, women are going to be invited to compete in professional sports, and they're going to look at this as progress. By the way, I did that. That's not ash. That's I was working in my yard earlier, so that's mud and dirt. But um, so I'm not ashy. But
Chad is moisturized, people. He stays moisturized. All right.
but yeah, as far as sports, yeah, unfortunately, and not only that, I don't know. Maybe I just be overthinking it. But if you look at high school sports, um, here in Texas, um, you have a lot of these teams that are dominating, but then you look at the team's average grade point average,
Mm-hmm.
and you look at the school's um, college readiness rate and their math proficiency and reading proficiency, and you see that it's below average, but yet they're spending all this money for the football coaches and the stadiums and the uniforms and the helmets. The priorities are misaligned, um, which I don't think we should have public schools in the first place. But that's neither here nor there. Um, to me, it's just hard to get into something like that knowing what's going on.
Mm-hmm.
You know what I'm
Well, you
saying?
have, yeah, definitely, and you have sons.
Hmm.
So what do you say if your sons want to get into sports if they have some athletic ability? You played high school
Hmm.
sports. Some of that
Right.
might be in their DNA. So do you?
Yeah.
What do you say to your sons if they want to get into sports and football or whatever?
No, I mean, I would encourage it. I would foster them through that. I'm not going to say no, you can't play sports. I think sports are good. I think you learn a lot about life through playing sports, especially team sports.
Mhm.
So I don't think that the idea or the concept of sports is bad per se. I'm just saying, like, it's not for me to sit and watch a football game or sit and watch a basketball game. For one, I don't have time to do it, but two, like, my brain gets to going if I'm watching uh, if I'm watching, for example, a football game and I see on the sideline they have the banner and it says Black Lives Matter or whatever,
Ugh.
like I'll just check out. I'll turn
And
it off.
and it says in the end zone, end racism.
Yeah,
It
and
takes all
racism.
of us. Stop.
Yeah, yeah. When I start seeing stuff like that, it's like, okay, I'm done. That's about enough of that. But yeah, I mean, as far as my son's wanting to join a sports team or what have you, yeah, I would encourage it and be present to their games and all the things. So I know that sounds hypocritical, but but
Well,
at the same
everything is.
time, I think that sports can do a young man a lot of good.
Yeah, everything's not black and white, man. There's a lot of gray
Right.
area. Everything is, you can't
Hmm.
say when I have my kids, this is what I'm going to, this is what happens. No,
Right.
man, you think that, but when you get into it, that's not the case.
Right.
But what do you do for fun? You are busy. You run a business. You have a family.
Hmm.
Making documentaries and things of that nature. What do you do for fun? How does Chad Jackson have fun, rewind or unwind? I should say.
Man, spending time with my family is fun for me. Um, I'm getting back into golfing. I used to golf a lot, so I'm getting into that. Also fishing. I'm getting back into that. I mean, my dad used to take us hunting and fishing when we were kids, and I haven't done it in a long time. So I'm getting back into that as well with my boys.
That's
Um,
great.
researching. Uh, believe it or not, I think researching is fun. I love learning new things. I love, you know, chasing down information, especially hard to get information, whether it means
Mhm.
going to a library and digging through archives, things of that nature. I get joy out of that. So
Do you
yeah.
prefer getting that information, chasing that information? Do you prefer that getting that information through people, talking with people who are well versed in what you want to know, or would you rather, like you said, get in those archives and kind of get in your own world and get your information that way?
I'd rather the latter. I'd rather just chase the information through archives and things of this nature. And the reason for that is because, talking to somebody, there's a lot of good in that. However, what you find is um, all people can do is opine. All people can do is um, give their own conclusion to a matter that they themselves have researched or something that they themselves have interpreted. But the kind of research that I do when it comes specifically to social justice movements and things of this nature is reading the writings of the individuals who quote unquote led the social justice movements. Or right now I'm doing a lot of research into ancient Roman history, ancient Germanic history, um, and it's good to read the notes and papers of the individuals who I'm researching, because you get an idea of what they themselves were thinking, what their agenda was, what drove them. And to me, I think it's more raw that way, to get the information that way. For example, Martin Luther King. People don't know this about Martin Luther King, but when it comes to a lot of the speeches that he gave, he didn't write most of his speeches. They were written by Stanley Levison, uh, Clarence B. Jones, Bayard Rustin, all of whom were avowed communists. And that made me wonder initially when I was researching him, you know, what is this so-called Christian pastor doing, taking cues from communists when communism is antithetical to Christianity? Um, Karl Marx, the father of communism, said himself that religion is the opiate of the people. So, you know, in the same way that the Bible says that what union does darkness have with light, I asked the question, what union does the so-called Christian pastor have with these avowed communists? And then you read more into the things that drove MLK, what his personal beliefs were, not only concerning Marxism, but also concerning religion. It becomes very clear, like, oh, he was himself sympathetic to Marxist ideology. So he wasn't a pastor in the truest sense of the word, because he didn't even believe in the central figure of Christianity. He didn't believe that Jesus rose from the dead. He didn't believe that Jesus was who he said he was. And so all of it was a front. All of it was deception, which goes into something that Walter Lippmann said. Walter Lippmann, by the way, was a public intellectual of sorts. He was an advisor to numerous politicians, including FDR. He wrote a book in 1922 called Public Opinion. And in this book, he says that if a leader wants to push a campaign, the way that he should do it, or the way that he does it, is uh, to use rhetoric that the public can get behind, whether it means pinching a grievance, sounding patriotic, this, that, and the third. And to the extent that you do that, you can get into the good graces of the people. And when they learn to trust you, you can then push whatever campaign you want. Never mind the fact that that campaign is disconnected from your rhetoric, from the thing that you said that got you into their good graces. That's the so-called "I have a dream" speech. Because if you listen to that speech, it sounds patriotic. It sounds wonderful. It sounds great. But what is he talking about immediately after? We want a mass redistribution of wealth. Well, mass redistribution of wealth is communism. And so what he's saying and what he's doing are at odds. When you look at the man Martin Luther King, he was a degenerate. He was a serial adulterer. He just wasn't a good dude. But we know him as the moral leader of the civil rights movement. He was anything but. But again, all of it was deception. When I look into somebody, and when I'm doing research into somebody like Martin Luther King, again, I'm more interested in what he himself believed, what he himself said, more so than what somebody had to say about him. So,
And speaking of that, I learned that in Uncle Tom too, and I talked about it during one of my lives, and you and Justin were kind enough to share it. Um, I felt stupid. I felt fooled. I was what, 41 years old 2 years
mhm.
ago. I'm a grown man. How in the hell was I fooled like that? Because Martin Luther King and the "I Have a Dream" speech, the part they always play. That they don't play that part immediately after he talks about a redistribution of wealth, which is textbook communism. They only pushed that one, that I have a dream at my schools growing up for Black History Month, which was nonsense. That's what they played. I remember McDonald's having commercials, and it's Martin Luther King and Harriet Tubman. It's this Mount Rushmore of these Black leaders, and you dare not question them. You dare not say anything that's different from what we've been told. And we've been told that Martin Luther King is the face of the civil rights movement. He is the face, uh, the ultimate representative for Black folks. And I'm not sure how that happened, but you don't hear that. You don't hear
Right.
the real Martin Luther King. And because he had some cool speeches that apparently he didn't even write, and it's the cadence of his voice, and he was a character. And when
Right.
you learn that, when you see the footage from Uncle Tom 2 of that lady he brought up on stage talking about I need some help and I need the government and all that kind of stuff. Wait a minute, what? Hold on. You're the little Black boys and little Black girls holding hands from the mountains of Georgia and all that kind of stuff. This is you. What's
Right.
this other stuff you're talking about and pushing? And we just don't hear that. And I think people are comfortable with that. They don't want to know the real Martin Luther King. They're comfortable in knowing or thinking that he was this one type of person, that he was just this great figure and he was morally sound and he didn't do anything wrong and he was just doing this for us, and the being put in jail and all this kind of stuff. And it really sucked in a good way, if that's possible, to learn the truth. It was
Right.
painful to learn, but it's the truth. And another
Mhm.
thing I want you to touch on is Black Wall Street. So we're told, and so many people believe, and even when you tell them, no, this is what happened pretty much immediately following that. Within 5 years, this is what happened in that same town. No. It was this and the evil white people, and they burned it down. But please educate us on Black Wall Street and what really happened.
Um, it's a good question. I can't get right into it without first laying the groundwork. Um, in order to touch on Black Wall Street, it's important that people first understand the Soviet Union's um, interest in pinching grievances and agitating relationships between Black and white in the South circa 1921. If you read the Communist Comintern documentation from around this time, you'll see that they had a huge interest in stoking the grievances. And so, to the question as to why they would have such an interest, you have to understand that the communists saw Black folks in America as the kind of tip of the spear in terms of ushering in communism into these United States of America. So, to the extent that Black businesses were thriving, that became a problem for the communists. That became a problem for the Soviet Union because, to the extent that Black folks are entrepreneurial, they are cashing in on this capitalist idea, they become useless to the communists. They're no longer that tip of the spear. And so you have to keep them agitated, you have to keep them riled up, you have to keep them discontent. And so as such, it became necessary for them to initiate all kinds of issues, brawls, riots, things of this nature. And it was a plus if in the process the Black businesses were burned down, because to the extent that those businesses are burned down and the Black folks say, look, white folks destroyed all this, we tried to do it their way, we tried to be capitalistic, and that's not working. To the extent that you get into that headspace, groups like the NAACP become all the more desirable. It becomes all the more desirable to join the ranks of the NAACP and the socialists, because if we're not able to get ahead through capitalist means, let's try this communist thing out. Maybe we can get ahead that way. So this is the kind of thought process that goes into this kind of socialist or communist agitation. The Soviet Union had something called agitprop. It was a a department within the Soviet Union, agitprop standing for agitation and propaganda. So they were very skilled at trying to stoke race grievances, and to use the kind of chaos and fallout to their advantage. Not only that, but they were very influential into the way that the Ku Klux Klan moved. A lot of the Klansmen were themselves communists, or at least were idiots who were very easy to trick and to take into the streets because they believed that these Negroes did this, that, or the third. It goes back to what you said earlier about it being gray. It's not so much black and white. It wasn't this whole business of, the Klansmen, they hated blacks and they wanted to make their life miserable. End of story. No, there's a lot more going on than what meets the eye. And the communists were very much a part of that. Now, all that to say this, there was a journalist by the name of Richard Lloyd Jones, and he owned a paper called the Tulsa Tribune. And in it, he wrote a story, Nabbed Negro for Attacking White Girl. The Negro in question was a man named Dick Rowland. And Dick Rowland allegedly tried to harass a white girl on an elevator. So he wrote this article knowing full well the kind of agitation that would follow. Richard Lloyd Jones was a so-called progressive. He was actually a Marxist. He and his wife were part of various progressive movements and agendas, including the Margaret Sanger's, it wasn't called Planned Parenthood at the time, but her birth control campaign. So they were part of all the progressive things. And so, again, he wrote this article knowing full well the kind of mess that it would start, the kind of mess that would ensue. At the same time, there was a civil rights attorney named A.J. Smitherman. He wrote for a black newspaper in Tulsa. And he wrote a similar article, only reverse, trying to get black folks into the street to cause some mess as well. And it worked like a charm. Blacks showed up to the jail where Dick Rowland was. Whites showed up to the jail where Dick Rowland was. And they were armed, they were angry, they were agitated and upset. And the white folks demanded, I should say, that the sheriff release Dick Rowland into their custody, but the sheriff refused because he was a man of the law. So because he refused, there was a fight that broke out. There were shots that were fired. Nobody knows who fired the shots. And there was a big brawl that took place. There was a riot that took place. And in this riot, there were buildings that were burned down. There were people who were displaced. There were a few dozen blacks who died, and there were also whites who died as well. And after the dust settled from this riot, everybody went their separate ways. Blacks began building back their businesses and their homes. And by 1922 or 23, they had it entirely built back. And Black Wall Street, or what we know as Black Wall Street, continued on without any kind of bother from, so-called whites or whomever. Continued on being successful until the 1960s, when guess what? The civil rights movement was in full effect. Integration was in full effect. The thing that killed Black Wall Street wasn't the riot in 1921. The thing that killed Black Wall Street was integration and civil rights rhetoric in the 60s, 40 some odd years later. This is the thing that people don't talk about. They want to hang on to 1921 and say that is when Black Wall Street ended. That is when entrepreneurship among blacks ended. This couldn't be further from the truth. And those who say that are ignorant. They don't know what the hell they're talking about. But again, what the communists were interested in worked to the extent that people today say that that is when that is proof that that capitalism can't work, that entrepreneurship can't work for blacks. Every time black folks build something, here along comes a white man to burn it down. So it worked in that effect, but it didn't work in the time, because rather than blacks in Tulsa running to the NAACP to be their savior, they got their asses back to work and built their stuff back. And so it didn't work in that regard. Um, and that, I think, is because black men in 1921 were built different compared to black men today. You see them walking around in high heels on TikTok and makeup and all kinds of other nonsense, fingernail polish. It's just a different breed. But anyway, I don't want to get carried away on that front. But yeah, this whole concept of, there was a massacre, and that's another thing they do. They change the word from riot to massacre, so as to insinuate that white folks came in the dead of night and just burned everything down and killed as many Negroes as they could find. Not happen, didn't happen at all. So again, the story is told differently today by your more prominent figures, including the president of the United States, Joe Biden. Um, um, the effect, once again, uh, it works because you have a lot of black youth today who, to the extent they learn about the story, the conclusion that they get is, once again, anytime black folks try to build something in America, white folks come and they burn it all down. So because capitalism can't work for us, because a white social construct can't work for us, we need to go some other means. We need to be more revolutionary in the way that we pursue politics in the United States. And when you look at the Cato Institute study in 2018, which asked the question of which is better, socialism or capitalism, every ethnic group said capitalism is better than socialism, except for so-called black folks. Black folks had a 60% favorability of socialism compared to capitalism. And that is a result of decades of indoctrination that was led by, I would say, the civil rights movement and the education therein.
They leave out two key points to the Tulsa riots. Number one, that it was never rebuilt, and number two, that everything was one-sided. Mm-hmm. When you mention that white folks were hurt too, black folk, they when they tell that story, it's no, these white men came, these boss hogs came riding in a whomping through that part of town and just scorched earth. Black folks, if they were out there, they got hurt or killed. If not, they ran in fear into the night. And when you hear stuff like that, it's similar to the story they tell us about the Indians, that the white man came and he gave them, liquor and disease blankets and, right, huddled them into the middle of the country. And they were just poor little red-faced people and that were just shoved around. And come on, man. But when you weave that story, when you paint that story, that picture for people, and you tell them that that's their history, well, then I don't have to be anything, because right, we never were anything. We were just hapless people that just got shoved around and abused by the white men, and whatever they do, we can't combat it. We can't come back from it. It's just, we can't do it. So therefore, nothing's expected of us. Greatness and achievement and excellence is not expected because we never had it, which it couldn't be further from the truth. And again, mm-hmm, Uncle Tom too, the images in that of black people together as families, fathers, mothers, children, dressed to the nines, going mm-hmm to church, not right, even going to church, suits, ties, just cars, going to work, homes, clean neighborhoods. Right. All of those things that are called white now, black people had that. We were prospering. We had most black families were like the Huxtables. Mom, mm-hmm, dad had professions, respectable people, but you can't tell people that they came from that and then expect them to be nothing. You have to tell them that they were nothing. Slaves, all
Right.
slaves did was pick cotton and tobacco. That's it. They didn't work in the shipyards. They weren't in the hospitals. They weren't blacksmiths. They weren't gunsmiths. They none of that. They were just sharecroppers, and that's it. So therefore, well, we never were nothing. We can't be anything, and
Right.
that's infuriating. And speaking of the the style and grace and elegance and professionalism and family that Black people had and exhibited back then, fast forward to today. You
Hmm.
have Lil RT, that little Black 9-year-old kid who's talking about the Glock and performing sex acts, and he's around these grown-ups smoking weed and
Right.
girls twerking in front of him. I've thought that was disgusting. I didn't think we were supposed to do that in front of children. But anyway, we got Lil RT. We have Sexy Red, who is proud to be a single mother for the second time. She is loose with her virtue. You have Suki Hana, who is just like her, disgusting, ratchet, multiple children by different men. The gang culture, the violence, the propping up and celebrating of the single mother. Mama, you can't say nothing about mama being raised by a single mom. It's a good thing. It's the Black experience. The rioting, the killing, and the tearing down of each other. If you are around Black folks and you are bettering yourself, you're going to school, you're reading, why you talk like that? Why you dress like that? You think you're white, you think you're better than us. We beat it out of each other.
Right.
So how did we go from that to the Sexy Reds of today? And if we can, how in the hell do we get back?
Um. Well, that's a loaded question. How did we get here? I mean, again, I think it's ideological subversion. I think that it's a cultural subversion. When you look at the history of what we know as Black folks in America, um, to your point, and as we lay out in Uncle Tom too, it hasn't always been that way. It used to be everything that you just explained, and gradually it shifted into what we see it as today. And you can't tell me that it's not Black culture, that Suki Hana and um, Sexy Red and all the others. You can't say that that's not Black culture. That is Black culture. And the reason I say that is because if it weren't, then why isn't it getting any kind of pushback? You know, if Black folks by and large disagreed with the imagery that people like Sexy Red and Jay-Z and Migos and others put out there, then they would be the prominent voices speaking out against it. But they're not. To the extent that you actually do speak out against it, you're called an Uncle Tom, a sellout, this, that, and the third. And so it must mean that even those who do consider themselves Black, but have a job that they go to every day, who have a mortgage that they pay and all the things, don't speak out against it, and they vote 90+% for the same party. Um, they have the same sentiments and fundamental beliefs as the Sukihanas and others. To that extent, it is Black culture. So it's become Black culture. I tell people all the time that Black culture is not organic, it's not authentic. It's something that was made in a Hollywood basement. That's what Black culture is. And we see that dating as far back as the so-called Harlem Renaissance. And people don't understand the Harlem Renaissance in itself was a concoction. It got that name from Carl Van Vechten, who was a white uh he was basically a pimp as far as Black entertainment is concerned. Um and there in Harlem, you wanted, if you were an artist, you wanted to get into the good graces of Mr. Carl Van Vechten. He was good friends with Langston Hughes. Both of them were homosexuals, and I believe were involved in some degenerate activity, if you follow my drift.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and basically, Langston Hughes would introduce a lot of these Black artists to Carl Van Vechten, who would then get them connected with publishers, uh, producers, things of this nature, so they can become famous. So the goal was to become famous, and a lot of these black artists were willing to fit the mold, so to speak, and play the part as to um, uh, projecting a message of what blackness is. And this has continued on to this very day as you get into the 70s with black exploitation films, and you look at who the writers and who the producers and executives are who are producing this messaging, this imagery that's glorifying drug using, drug selling, pimping, hustling, and all the things. They're telling you what black culture is or what it's supposed to be. And the fact is, the entertainment industry is what leads as far as what black culture is and how black people identify. So you have that happening on the entertainment front. You also have something similar happening on the political activism front. For a long time in this country, blacks were just as diverse politically and philosophically as whites and other ethnic groups. However, um, as you get into the 60s, Martin Luther King, who was being funded by uh, um, who's a white Jewish guy who was funding him. Um, I forget his name. I just said it earlier. Um, anyway, so uh, Stanley Levinson. So he was being funded by Stanley Levinson. Stanley Levinson was basically paying his salary, his mortgage, everything for like the 9 years up until his death, Martin Luther King's death. Stanley Levinson was also his promoter or his publicist, so to speak. So he would always be securing these gigs for Martin Luther King all over the country. One of the places that Martin Luther King would go into were prominent and affluent black churches. These were upper middle class blacks who saw themselves differently than the more degenerate subsect of so-called black culture. They saw themselves as different. They saw themselves as American. They saw themselves as, being assimilated into the American idea. But what Martin Luther King was able to do almost masterfully was to go into places like Baldwin Hills, which Baldwin Hills, if you know anything about California, I'm sure you do living in California, used to be considered the Black Beverly Hills because you had a lot of black professionals and executives, doctors, lawyers, things of this nature who lived there. So Martin Luther King would go into these churches and basically guilt these more affluent blacks into not doing enough for the civil rights movement, guilt them into seeing themselves differently than their brothers and sisters who are not as affluent, who are not as privileged. And subsequently, you saw a lot of these more affluent blacks joining the NAACP, taking out life long memberships and investing a lot of their time and money into the civil rights movement. And so what Martin Luther King and his ilk were able to do was to create a kind of monolith in terms of what black people believe politically. And so when you look at the entertainment industry, when you look at the political activism, when you look at all the fronts, you'll begin to realize that they were able to shift what we know today as black culture. And so this to me is the reason why once upon a time, the men to look up to in the so-called black community were the pastors, the fathers, the businessmen. And as you get to today, those people or those positions have been replaced with your P. Diddy's, your Jay-Z's, your hip hop executives, so on and so forth. So how do we get here? How do we get to a place where the people that we aspire to be, the people we look up to, are not the men who are actually taking care of their families and leading by example, but instead are the former drug dealers who brag about selling drugs, who brag about the bodies that they, stacked up, or the women that they've slept with, and things of this nature. This happened gradually over, at this point, over 100 years. So this is how we have gotten to where we are now. And again, yes, you can say that not every black person lives in the hood. Not every black person sags, or not every black person looks or acts like Sukihana or Sexy Red, but they vote the same way. They don't have anything negative to say. They don't push back against it and say this doesn't represent us on a mass scale. And again, to the extent that you do get any kind of verbal pushback, it's usually a conservative, a so-called black conservative, which I don't really use that terminology, but I will for the sake of this conversation. And those people are once again uh, uh, dismissed as being Uncle Toms and sellouts. And so, all that to say, this must be black culture. I mean, it must be, because if it weren't, you'll see more black people speaking out against it.
And how many times do you think you've been called a coon or a sellout or Uncle Tom?
I don't know. I don't really pay attention to that, but I would venture to say a lot. Nobody has called me that to my face.
Never.
Yeah, nobody's called me. I mean, social media is a different thing. You see a lot of these delusional black folks getting into your comment section saying coon or put on the little coon emoji or whatever. But I've never been called it to my face. That's for sure.
Yeah, same here. Never. Always online. Usually the most vile, disgusting stuff comes from other black folk, but never ever to my face. And I've asked this question of my brother because there are very few people whose opinions I value. And you remind me a lot of my brother. Well educated, both, life and formally. But why us? Why isn't this happening to Mexican folks? Why isn't this happening to white folks or Asians? Why black folks? Why do we take this baton from these Marxists and these communists and run with it? We're like a crock pot. They put all the ingredients in, set it, and forget it. We'll take it from here. We'll verbally and physically beat each other down when we try to do better. We'll kill each other in or out of the womb. We will gladly act like this. Sexy Red and Sukihana did a rap video in the parking lot of a Popeye's chicken. They did a rap video in front of a Planned Parenthood. Why is it us, Chad? Why us? How does it work so well on us?
Well, I mean, again, like a lot of time and effort was put in initially into getting their hooks into, by them I mean the communists, or whatever you want to call them. A lot of time, I would call them Satanists, but a lot of time and effort was put into getting their hooks into the prominent black figures, your NAACP contingent, the WEB Du Boises, and that whole contingent. Your entertainers, your Nina Simone's, your James Browns, this, that, and the third. And they were able to, and again, gradually shift the dynamic, the cultural sentiments, the body politic, if you will, of black folks in this country. And of course, you have a lot of quote unquote grievances to go off of in terms of slavery, in terms of so-called Jim Crow and others. You're able to look at this and use it as a kind of foundation to say that, look, this is how they treated us in the past. This is how they continue to treat us even now. When you look at these black and white photos prior to the 1960s of black folks who are dressed to the nines, who are carrying themselves with dignity, you don't see any distinguishable difference between them in that era and white folks in that era. They look the same. The only difference is their skin complexion, but the way that they take care of their families, the way that they go to work every day, the way that they move and this and the third is no distinguishable difference. But as you get into the 70s, you have the kind of pro-black era, the kind of say it loud, I'm black and I'm proud era, where it became vogue to embrace one's blackness. You see all of a sudden picking your hair out into an afro, wearing African garb, naming your children all kinds of weird, so-called African names, which aren't really African names, and then from there, you're able to come up with names out of left field where you merge this person's name with that person's name. And all of a sudden you have a concoction. um, blackness became something that you wear. And so nobody stops to ask the question, who has defined what blackness is? More often than not, you'll find that the engineers of blackness aren't even themselves black, which is something that we're going to get into in Uncle Tom 3. But they didn't do it. Um, they didn't do it independent of black figures who are all too willing to play the part. You know, again, Langston Hughes, he could have told Carl Van Vechten no. You know, P. Diddy, you know, Dr. Dre, he could have told Jimmy Iovine no. You know what I'm saying? So anyway, all that to say that all these people that black culture looked to as the kind of gatekeepers or the kind of trendsetters of black culture are themselves embed with nefarious people and are themselves nefarious, and they kind of set the tone for what black culture is. And so at this point, at this, you know, um stage and where we are, it doesn't take much. It doesn't take as much time and effort as it once did, when you had to subvert the culture, so to speak, where you had to shift the culture, so to speak. These people, by the way, are very interested in the cognitive sciences and the social sciences. So they understand patterns and they understand how to get people to go a certain way. And so at this point, because all of that work was put in the early to mid 20th century, we're now at a point where it doesn't take much. All it takes is the releasing of a film, or, you know, some thing that happens, George Floyd or whatever, to reinforce and to kind of rejigger, um, or you know, pump a new found energy into the way that black culture moves. You didn't have as much time and effort put into Mexicans or Asians or whatever the case may be. That's not to say that these groups are untouched by communist or globalist influence. They are too. They are as well. If you look at the way that communism exploded throughout the 20th century, whether it be in Southeast Asia and various parts of Africa, um, frankly, all over the world, these people have been affected too. Latin America, Cuba, for peeps' sake, is a communist country. Venezuela, like, so, yeah, you see you see it exploding all over the world. What makes America unique is on the ground level, and of course, I'm not talking about the politicians because they were in on it too. That's a different story for a different day. A lot of our government was in on this cultural and ideological subversion as well, especially in the 70s. Our Supreme Court was rampant with it. But but on the ground level, that is to say, peer to peer, you know, folks like you and I who are making a living and doing our thing, um, we are the reason historically, black, white, Hispanic, whatever, why America was tough to penetrate, because we know what freedom tastes like, for one, and two, we have a healthy fear of God. And so it was very difficult for communists who are deeply atheist, who envision a utopia that's devoid of God, that's devoid of Christian ethics. It was very difficult to convince us to go the communist way. So you weren't able to penetrate us much the same as you were able to do with some of these countries that, you know, were atheist or didn't have the same kind of moral values that we had. And so you have to do it subversively. You had to do it covertly. You have to do it through entertainment. You have to do it through very sinister means. You have to do it through education. And one thing that's true about communists and globalists is they're not afraid to play the long game. They're not afraid to play the long game. They do something called revolution by hiring committee, where they uh, establish sleeper cells all over the country in various institutions, government, private sector, this, that, and a third, in order to gradually shift those institutions into their liking. I know what I'm saying sounds very uh, conspiracy theory esque, but I can back everything that I'm saying with receipts and with hard research and evidence. But the fact is, most people aren't willing to listen or they don't care to hear it, because most people just want to, live their lives, enjoy their lives, and not have to worry about it, not have to think about it. But to the extent that we don't think about it, to the extent that we aren't aware of how this game is played, we are losing our country all the more. And who knows what we'll look like in 20 years.
Look at 20 years ago, but 23
Yeah.
years ago. Let's take it back to 2000. You watch, or just think about how it was, but you watch TV shows and movies, things were just totally different just 20 years ago. And 20 years ago
Right.
is a blink.
Right.
That's nothing. Let me ask you this. And if you can boil it down to a simple yes or no answer, then please do. But if the same groups, all these same men that you named who were booking these events for Martin Luther King and writing his speeches, and Langston Hughes and all these guys who were kind of behind the scenes whispering in their ear, and this whole machine that they focused on black folks. If you were to take black folks out and put white folks in there, could they possibly have the same results?
Mm-mm. It wouldn't have been as effective. The short answer is no. It wouldn't have been as effective because, again, you can always rely on the fact that slavery existed in America as a means by which to make people feel guilty, make white people feel guilty, make black people feel entitled to, that in itself is a good enough catapult to really get this campaign going. It will be much more difficult to do that with what we call white people, which we all know is not as simple as that. You have people that have come from Germany, people who have come from, Eastern Europe. You have people who come from literally all over, Europe that we call white people. And the fact is, to the extent that these people came over here, the Irish and others, the Italians, they weren't exactly embraced with open arms. They too were kept out of certain places in the same way that Negroes were kept out of. And by the way, when you look at what we call Jim Crow laws or separation laws, it's not so much that, it's more complex than what people like Michael Eric Dyson and Mark Lamont Hill and others make it out to be. The fact that, and Manning Johnson talks about this, when you look at some of these regulations and laws, it wasn't so much that this was white people doing something to black folks. It's rather the case that black leaders and white leaders were coming together and coming up with some kind of compromise where they agreed to separate, to have separate schools, to have separate businesses, this, that, and the third, because they saw it as the best possible scenario for their so-called people to be successful in the marketplace, or to be successful within the confines of their own quote unquote cultures. And some of these laws had deadlines. And a lot of these regulations were being repealed well before Martin Luther King stepped onto the scene, because businessmen were finding that they were unfeasible, that there's no way that we can make money with these separation laws. So they were repealing them without the involvement of the NAACP, without the involvement of the civil rights movement. And so it's a lot more complex than what people make it out to be. They like to exaggerate the conditions, because to the extent that you can exaggerate the conditions and make it look like a black person was just randomly walking down the street, and all of a sudden here came a police officer along with a fireman, and they started hosing the Negro down and sicking a dog on him. Like, this wasn't happening every day in the South. It just wasn't. But that's an aside. The fact is, the conditions are not nearly as turbulent as we're made to believe today. The reason why they exaggerate it and exacerbate it to the extent that they do is to make somebody like a Martin Luther King all the more relevant and all the more necessary. Because the fact is, without the civil rights movement and without communist agitation and involvement, and without the government hyping these people up, all of these Jim Crow laws would have died before the 90s. I would venture to say before the 80s, they would have been repealed because they were just not feasible. And this is the free market doing what the free market does, unabated by the government. So the answer to your question, I guess that's my long-winded of saying no, it wouldn't have worked if it were just white folks, because um, you don't have that kind of catapulting thing that you can lean on to uh, to to initiate your grievance social
Mhm.
justice thing. Um, and I would say too that in the 70s, this is when it really took off, because not only did you have the black exploitation films, you also had Roots, and
Oh yeah, Alex
Roots,
Haley. Mhm.
yeah, Alex Haley, who admitted that he exaggerated the whole story. Um, but a lot of people, they look at slavery through the lens of Roots and not through
Mhm.
what actually happened in America in terms of slavery. So,
Yeah, even Alex Haley admitting that it's too late. The damage is done. The horse is out of the barn. He could, I don't know if he's dead or not, but he could get on TV right now and say, "Hey, it was all a lie," blah blah blah. But it's too late. It's already,
mhm,
become its own thing. And yeah, you're right. The fact that Black folks have slavery in our history, that's the eternal flame that burns. That's the bottomless well that they can always throw a bucket in, and when they
mhm,
pull it up, it'll be overflowing. It's that.
right.
It reminds me of, I think it's in Russia or something somewhere. There's this tree and it has a fire burning inside of it. The tree is on fire
Mhm,
and it's been on fire
mhm,
for years. It always burns. It's always there. And I think that's what slavery is. They can always go back whenever we need to stir things up, whenever we need to get them riled up or whatever. We can always go back to slavery, even though it's been
mhm.
hundreds of years. None of us breathing today had anything to do with it. I've seen cotton fields a few times, never touched any, but they can they can always go back to that. That's their
Right.
tried and true. I'll always be there for you. But you're mentioning that these things aren't as simple as some might make it be, and it is very complex. And that's one of the things that I love about the Uncle Tom documentary is all of that stuff is made easy to consume. You guys, you and Justin and everybody involved, you guys, the way it's produced, the way it's edited, it's so easy to consume and it's so full of good information. And um it's not take this information from this and hate these groups or dislike these
Mhm,
people. It's here's the facts, here's the proof, here's what it was, here's the evidence. And I love that. And it kind of explain a little bit the process of making a film. Where do you start? Does it start with the research? I imagine it would, but how do you start making a film?
mhm. No, it definitely does start with the research, and also it starts with getting our cast into the chair and just hammering them with questions. And what's interesting about that is a lot of the cast will come equipped with their own information, their own research, things that they themselves have found to be true. But also, you get to asking them questions, and you get to asking, going deep into things, and they're kind of figuring out stuff along the way. So we try to make the interviews as conversational as possible and not forced, not something that you know they're auditioning for or trying out for. Is like no, let's just have a conversation, much like you and I are having now. And so we did the round of interviews. We went in and did pretty intensive research. Then we brought some of the people back after having done the research, or even sharing some of the research with them and encouraging them, like, hey, fact check these things, um, do your own, do, and then bringing them back, and then they come back a lot more smarter on this or that issue, and the rest is history. Um, and then two, like delving into archives and looking for a lot of this uh, raw footage that isn't really it's not exactly the footage or the imagery that we're used to seeing, because we're used to seeing the dogs and the hoses, and like we
Mm-hmm.
all know what it is as far as the so-called civil rights movement is concerned. And all that is meant to reinforce or validate a narrative. And there's no counter narrative. There's no um pushback against the, you know, established narrative that we all believe. Doesn't matter if you're right or left. I mean, for Pete's sake, Martin Luther King's birthday as a holiday, that was done by Ronald Reagan, right? And so you got conservatives and Republicans saying, no, Martin Luther King is our thing. And you got liberals and communists saying, no, he's our thing. And so Martin Luther King and the civil rights movement becomes this kind of tug of war. And I tell people all the time, if you're conservative, let go of the rope. Just let go of the rope. Because to the extent that your heroes are their heroes, we're going to continue going down this kind of Marxian path. And so what we wanted to do with the film is to set the record straight, to tell the truth about what actually happened and who these people actually were, and hope that those who call themselves conservative will grab hold of this information, take it further and do their own research so that they're not operating from this kind of defense that we always find ourselves operating from. We never go on the offense. We always are letting the so-called left lead the dance, so to speak. And the fact is, the Republican Party today is the Democrat Party from 10 years ago, because we're not original in our thinking. We don't, like, again, our heroes are their heroes. We all look at Rosa Parks as this hero, even though she herself was a fraud. Like, all these people that we think are heroic are actually frauds. And that's important to look at, because again, some might say, well, it's the history, it's history, it's in the past. Let's not focus on that. Let's move forward. Well, it's important to go back and look at these things, because you don't get DEI, you don't get affirmative action, you don't get Black Lives Matter or all these other race grievance issues and policies. You don't get that without the civil rights movement. You don't get that without the heroism of Martin Luther King. They're able to, like you said, keep that fire burning by always looking at Martin Luther King, always looking at slavery, to justify new legislation to come, to justify new social justice movements to come. They look at that as a kind of framework or a kind of blueprint to push other legislation in the future, because we have been conditioned once again to look at these people as heroes. So if I can set the record straight and say, well, no, this person wasn't a hero, he was a pawn, he was a deceiver. My hope is that, again, if you call yourself a conservative, you will look at that and you will think twice about the next time a social justice movement come along. You won't be so easily tricked or duped into going along with it. When we saw George Floyd, you had conservatives, Democrats, Republicans, you had everybody who all of a sudden moved just a little bit further to the left. And actually, as it turns out, Derek Chauvin wasn't kneeling on George Floyd's neck. Mm-hmm. You know what I mean? Like, George Floyd had enough drugs in him to kill 3 horses. Like, again, the facts are such to where had people taken the time to really look at it, it wouldn't have became the sensationalized thing that we know it as today. And I would say that had people known their history, had people known what we lay out in Uncle Tom 2 and how this game is played, they would have been less likely to fall for the whole George Floyd thing or the Michael Brown thing or whatever the case may be. And so I feel that because people think that it's unfathomable, that it's inconceivable that such efforts will be can be taken by these sinister globalist Marxist type people, because they think it's unfathomable that people like who's the guy who wrote Rules for Radicals. I forget his name. Anyway, he's the guy who wrote Rules for Radicals and talked about, like, you're not going to lead a revolution by taking picket signs and going into the streets. You lead a revolution by dressing up in a suit, looking like the corporate executives, going in and subverting it from the inside. But people, Saul Alinsky, there you go. People think it's unfathomable that people like Saul Alinsky exist, and because when you don't know or you pretend that the devil doesn't exist, that leaves the devil full reign to do his mess in the public. And you don't know. You think it's all organic. You think it's all natural. Of course, these Black people are rising up. Look at how they've been treated for hundreds of years. Not realizing that, no, there's puppeteers behind this. There's people who are pulling the strings behind this. And so my hope with Uncle Tom 2 is to correct the public record, the historical record first and foremost, but to equip people with the knowledge to not be as gullible the next time something like this comes along.
Man, one of the images I will never forget from that entire George Floyd debacle was Nancy Pelosi and others wearing kente cloth scarves or whatever those were and kneeling for 8 minutes and 46 seconds. I bet you those kente cloth scarves probably still had the tag on them. And as soon as they were done doing that crap, they took those right back to Target or wherever they got them
Exactly.
from. That who didn't look at that and laugh? That's ridiculous. Even if all of that stuff, even if it were true, even if George Floyd was a model of health, he had nothing in his system, and he really did die that way. That Chauvin really did kneel on his neck and he choked him to death. Even if that was true, that was ridiculous.
Yeah.
That was a mockery. That was I could not believe I was seeing that.
And where was the so-called black community to speak out against that? Again, I don't buy any of their this is racist, that's racist. Bernardo, I don't buy any of that. Any story that I hear from a black person talking about some racial experience, like I don't buy it. I'm just not inclined to believe it because I know that, chances are they look at everything through the lens of race because they've been conditioned to look at it that way. And so when they see the Nancy Pelosi and others wearing the kente cloth, or when they hear Joe Biden saying, if you don't vote for me, you're not black.
Yeah.
When they hear people like Chelsea Handler saying, yeah, I told 50 Cent that he better not vote for Trump and he listened to me. Like, they're not outraged about any of this because, again, they've been conditioned to see everything through race. So yeah, this is totally what black culture is today. So,
and when you said that Rosa Parks was a fraud, to some that's shocking. How she's been propped up and built up and celebrated and everything, and she said no and she wouldn't go to the back. That's shocking to some people, but it's the truth, and people need to understand that and do your homework. Don't believe these fools. And I know it's comfortable. I was wrapped in that same warm blanket that Martin Luther King and all of these civil rights leaders, or whatever you want to call them, that's exactly where the way they were sold to us, that was all true. And you just have to break
I heard a lot
out
of
that.
Republicans. I heard a lot of Republicans when Black Lives Matter became a prominent organization or popular organization. There were a lot of Republicans saying, well, they're doing it all wrong. They should do it the way Martin Luther King did it. See, they marched and they were, they had suits on and they were nonviolent. They should do what Martin Luther King did. And so to me, again, the fact that Republicans are in this conundrum and they're so, I guess, bewitched by the whole thing to where they're looking at Martin Luther King as an example, as opposed to the fact that he himself was a Marxist in the same way that Black Lives Matter are Marxists. Again, two sides of the same coin. Martin Luther King, like the Black Lives Matter movement, is no different than the civil rights movement. Martin Luther King was a thug. I mean, when you look at the tactics and how they would go into these cities and purposefully like do these agitative schemes because they knew that they had the media on their side, and to the extent that you can continue like pestering and pestering and agitating, none of that gets caught on camera. But to the extent that you have law and order, like they finally get the dogs out, they finally show some force to try to disperse these crowds or whatever, then the cameras start rolling, and then that's the image that you see on the front page of the newspapers. This is how the whole thing works, because they're trying to once again pull on the heartstrings of the larger society to make you believe like, man, those poor Negroes, they were treated so badly, they needed Martin Luther King. Like, no, they were going into these places causing some mess, and that's what ended up happening as a result. Today, in the age of social media, where everybody has a camera or on their phone and things of this nature, it's difficult to do what it's difficult for Black Lives Matter to do what the civil rights leaders were able to do in the way that they did it, because you have people who are more willing to call them out, but it's it's a continuation of the civil rights movement. It's not a distinction from it. It's a continuation of it.
When you mentioned, them holding or presenting Martin Luther King as an example, turn the other cheek, nonviolent. It reminded me of this thing that happened to me when I was in third grade. So I was one of maybe two or three black kids at my elementary school growing up. And so kids, sometimes would say, they call me the N word or whatever, have some racist term or word, whatever they would call me. And so I remember as a kid watching a one of those like after school specials, right? And there was this black kid, and somebody had painted the N word on his fence in spray paint, right? And I remember sitting
Mhm.
there and thinking to myself, if somebody ever does something that like that to me, I'm not going to take the after school special route. I'm not going to try to understand them or talk to them.
Right.
I'm gonna lash out physically, because
Mhm.
that's terrible. Don't do that. So that was my mentality. If somebody said something to me like that, I was gonna beat them up.
Yeah.
So I got in a fight
Pop
with
in the
this
mouth.
kid. Yeah, and I it wasn't like they say it and boom, I would try to ignore it or whatever. I would give them a chance to not do it again. If they kept it up,
Mhm.
it's on. So I got in a fight with this kid, and I get pulled into the principal's office, and the principal's name was Mrs. Baker. And she sat me down and she said, you should be more like Martin Luther King. Turn the other cheek. I'm 8 years old, so I know who Martin Luther King is, but it's over my head, right? So
Yeah.
I get in trouble. I get sent home from school, and my mom and my dad are talking to me, and I said, "Yeah, she told me to be more like Martin Luther King." And my mom said, "What?" I was like, "Yeah," and I didn't get it. And so the next day, my parents went up there to the school, and my mom told me to sit down outside, where the secretary is, and wait. And they went in there and talked to the principal. And when they came out, my mom was, she was upset. You could tell, I could, the look on her face. And the principal was like, "Oh, I'm sorry, anything, give me a call." But I just I didn't understand it. But now as an adult, to tell a little kid, what do you mean turn the other cheek and be like Martin Luther King? But again, we all believe that Martin Luther King was this benevolent figure, and just in the face of all of this stuff that now we know he started it,
Yeah.
just turn the other cheek and basically take it. And I was like, nah, I'm not doing that shit. No way.
So
Um,
whenever the little white boy called you a nigger, um, were you just like minding your own business and playing with some toys, and he just came out of nowhere and called you that, or what was the context?
it was just I don't know, he got mad or something, and he said it to me. Something happened for us to be upset at each other. We were
Right.
mad or something, and then he said that. And that's
Yeah.
another thing. That kid, he wasn't saying it because he was a little 8-year-old racist. He was saying it because he knew that was a word that would upset me. He knew that was
Right.
insulting. And I'm so
Mhm.
glad that my parents didn't fill my mind with poison to see everything as as racism. Everything is an affront to your race. And no, these kids, they're kids. They were just saying what
Right.
they thought would hurt my feelings and piss me off.
Right.
Some of those kids I became friends with,
Yeah.
but for somebody to say that to me, I knew what they were trying to do, and this
Mhm.
is the way that I'm going to react to it.
Right.
But something I wanted to ask you about the Uncle Tom films. Why the black and white footage? Why film it in
Mhm.
in black and white?
So Justin filmed the initial one in black and white, um, because a lot of the archive footage was in black and white. And although you have these, modern voices that are narrating the film, um, he wanted to basically put everything into one um time frame, if you will. I don't know if that makes sense, but basically
Yeah,
he wanted everything to like kind of blend in together, and that kind of became the staple of the Uncle Tom franchise. So we just kind of kept it going. And part two part three will be in black and white as well. But you'll notice that even in Uncle Tom, the original film, the whole thing is in black and white except for the the footage of black families thriving and prospering. I don't know if you
that's
caught
right.
that. But that's we use color to connote a positive time, like positivity and so-called black culture, which I wouldn't call it black culture as much as I would call it American culture, because here's a time where blacks saw themselves as one and the same with America. And then two, in Uncle Tom Part Two, we do the same thing where in the beginning, in the opening of the film, you have just this, 4 minute, just continuous stream of black home videos of
Hmm.
families,
Yeah,
you know, going to church together, dancing together, eating together, and all that's in color. Um, what we're talking about in the films is pretty heavy stuff, pretty tragic stuff, and I think the black and white is symbolic of the weight of what it is we're talking about, juxtaposed to the color of something positive and something inspiring, if that makes sense.
definitely. And before we wrap it up, I have one more question, and we'll get into a little rapid fire. But at the Uncle Tom 2 premiere, you're there. All the people in it, B. Tatum, Carol Swain, Alan West, and others are all there. Other conservatives who are in social media who happen to be of the same complexion as us. I don't want to use black conservative, but
Yeah,
all of those people in the
played
room.
out.
Larry Elder was, huh? Was what's that?
Was it black conservatives played out?
Yeah, man, definitely. Um, and Larry Elder was there, and actually myself and Oliver Mack and Craig Long and his wife were kind of standing together. We're going into
Yeah.
the theater to get our seats and stuff, and we find four seats in a row right next to each other. So we put like we had the DVD copy of the DVD, some other paperwork and stuff like a poster, and so we put it in the seats to hold their seats because Craig and his wife went to the bathroom.
Hmm.
But as soon as they walk out, Larry Elder and his girlfriend came in, and they walks up to us
Hmm.
like, "Hey, Larry Elder, nice to meet you," and everything. Met his girlfriend, and he says, "Can we sit next to you guys?" We're like, "Yeah." So we took Craig's stuff, moved it. So a little behind the scenes there. So Craig, sorry man, Larry Elder wanted your spot. We actually told Craig came back in and he puts his arm like, what? I was like, it's Larry Elder, man. What do you want me to do?
Understandable. Understandable.
But all those people there, the people you work with, other people who came to watch, what was it like watching people enjoy your work? Were you even watching the film, or were you watching us watch it? What was that like to have your finished product in front of a live audience?
There were mixed feelings. I was watching both the crowd and the film, because we knew we didn't actually make the film we wanted to make. Um, Whenever we were making the film, there was so much information that by the time it was said and done, the film was 5 hours long, 5.5 hours
Damn.
long. And we were like, man, we have to break this down and we have to make it palatable for people to understand. So we had to do a lot of work, and we decided then that okay, we're gonna have to make a part three. We have like a 20-minute Martin Luther King scene where we go more in depth into who he was and what the civil rights movement was all about. But we have to save that and table it for part three because um, what we did in the film, a spoiler alert, is we lay out what communism is, what Marxism is, how it showed up in the world, throughout the world, and how it came to the borders of America, and how Black culture was a part of that, and how Black activists were the spearheads of, the initiation of communism in America. So once we lay that groundwork and we get the audience to understand what this is and how it works, now we can introduce you to Martin Luther King. So that's why we save him for the very end. And originally, we just go there. We just kind of let the cat out of the bag, so to speak. But we end up tabling that and say we'll get to that next, and that's how the film ends. And I remember whenever we say that at the end, there was an audible gasp from the people who were watching. And some people said that they got chills and like they were moved to tears throughout the film and things of this nature because we are talking about times past and how things once were and how this ideology has disrupted the family. You have to understand, prior to the 1960s, 3 out of 4 Black children were growing up in an intact home with both the mother and the father present. We are now at a place where most Black babies are being aborted in the womb. And those who are born, 70% of them, 70 plus percent of them are growing up in a single parent household. So how did we get here? Uncle Tom Part Two um, answers that question, or at least attempts to answer that question. So we knew that the film will take people for a ride. Um, it will captivate you and lay out things in such a way that you can understand and see where we're going. We talk about ideological subversion. We talk about a lot of things in the film, as you know, but um, it had the desired effect, as far as I'm concerned, in terms of the way that people resonated with it. I had a lot of older people reach out to me in person, over email, over IGDM, and they all tell me the same thing. These are people anywhere from late 50s to 70s, and they tell me, watching that film, I realized something. When I was a youngster, my dad used to talk negatively about Martin Luther King and the Civil Rights Movement. These are Black people too. They used to say that he was a communist and that he was a troublemaker, this, that, and the third. And I always rejected what they were saying because I believed that Martin Luther King was doing good. I believed everything that was being said about the civil rights movement. But watching that film brought me back to the things my dad used to say, the things that my mom used to say. And it makes so much sense now to see it in that light than when I was a youngster. So to me, that's been the biggest impact, and and one of the things that makes me realize that the work that we put into it was worth it. Because even though the film isn't as popular as Netflix's The 13th or some of these more woke films that get a lot of backing from big time studios and donors and um, are being shown in classrooms across this country, even though it's not as popular as those films because nobody wants to touch it. The fact that people who do see it resonate with it to that degree, I think it wasn't done in vain.
Not at all, man. A great film. And when I did my review on it, one of the things I said, and I stand behind that forever, is that documentary should be shown in every classroom, whether it be
Hmm.
high school, college, whoever is, whatever age you are, when you're old enough to understand what the film is about, it needs to be shown to people because all it is the truth. It's
Hmm.
not skewed in any way. It's not trying to convince people to be on any side politically. It's the truth, and the
Hmm.
truth should be for everybody.
Yeah,
And one, I'm sorry, go ahead.
you you notice, like, in the film, I mean, we do mention Republican and Democrat in part one, but I don't know if you caught this, but in part two, we don't mention Republican or Democrat at all. We don't mention, like, you never hear the word Democrat or Republican brought up one time in part two. And the reason for that is because we're trying to make it clear that this is about ideology and culture and how it was shifted and why it was shifted and to what end was it shifted. Um, so that's what we're talking about. And I think, like, through the filmmaking process, I came to realize I'm not actually a quote unquote Republican because Republicanism, like, this is a political party, and when it comes to political parties, they're all controlled by the same donors, the same um, puppeteers, so to speak. And if I truly am a patriot, if I'm truly someone who believes in America and the promise of America, I'm not going to accomplish that under the guise of a political party. I'm going to accomplish that as an individual who loves my country, who loves my neighbors, and am willing to be a man and stand up for what is right. I think the parties, they dilute and convolute that mission, and so it's to that end that I don't consider myself a part of any kind of political party. But yeah, we don't mention Republican or Democrat at all in part two, nor are we going to do it in part three. So.
And one of the great parts about it is to all the things that it talks about, it affects us all. You know, if
Mhm.
black folks are doing poorly and the violence and all that stuff, it affects everybody. So
Right.
this should be shown to everyone. And one of the things, one section of the film, one part of the film, it was embarrassing. It was the part where, and this is another part where the black and white footage is very impactful. It was a series of young black folks cussing and yelling at the camera and the
Mhm.
bandanas and all that, just that gang violent, degenerate part of black culture. And it was
Mhm.
embarrassing to sit in there in a room full of people, some of them who weren't black, to sit in a room with white folks and
Yeah.
see this shit. It was
Right.
embarrassing.
Right.
And it shouldn't, I mean, and you know, nothing on you guys, but it was just embarrassing to see that, to see black folks acting that way. You
No,
almost
I
want
get
to
what you're
stand
saying.
up and say, it's not all of us, you know,
No,
it's
it
not
was
all of
important
us.
to show that because, unfortunately, with a lot of conservative films or Christian films, the directors will shy away from showing the ugliness of the world because they want to keep things PG because we want families to watch it and this, that, and the third. But, going that route takes away the rawness and the realness of your film. If we want to make it good, we have to show you what the world actually looks like. We have to show you what black culture actually looks like in many respects so we can show you and tell you how we got here and why this is happening. So, you know what I mean? We didn't want to, like, yeah, we understand that churches will be seeing this and people like will want their kids to watch it and things of this nature. And to be truth be told, there were some emails that we got from people who say, I love the film, but I can never show it to my kids because it has cussing or it shows this or it shows that. And
Mm-hmm.
that's fine. I'm not going to tell somebody how they, I mean, I will tell people how to raise their kids, but I know my limits, if that makes sense. Um, but at the same time, it's like, we have to show it. It's the same thing with Passion of the Christ. In the Passion of the Christ, directed by Mel Gibson, he shows you the Christ figure being brutally beaten and basically, you know, pulled apart, because he wants to show you the fact that, and the film didn't do it justice, but it didn't hold back, but he wanted to show you what Jesus went through for your sins. Um, to show Jesus with like a little speck of blood, or to, you know what I mean, make him look pretty on the cross. That's not going to do it justice, and you're going to be like, okay, yeah, that was a good movie, but I still don't know. You know what I'm saying? So anyway, all that to say, we needed to show that in order to show you what, how the world really is. So
It worked. Okay. Are you ready for some rapid fire esque questions here?
let's do it.
Um so Mansfield, Texas. Which of these places to eat would you pick? Our place, Main Street Taco, or the Flying Squirrel Coffee?
Our place.
Okay.
Our place is the best place to eat simply because they have good home cooked Southern meals there. The only problem with them is I think they close like at 2 p.m. So,
Okay.
um,
Breakfast and lunch.
yeah, breakfast and lunch. So, but yeah, I mean, very, very good food. High cholesterol, but really good food.
Mm-hmm. I actually called the Mansfield, Texas Visitor Center, and the lady who
Mhm.
answered, I asked her that, and the first thing she said, she goes, "Ooh, our place." I was like, "Okay, cool." But she gave me the first two. She's like, "Oh, you got to put the flying squirrel in there." She's like, if you're from here, you know.
Yeah.
So family trip or a movie night at home with the family?
Hmm. Family trip. Family trip, just because those are hard to come by. My kids want to have a movie night every other night. So,
They
but I,
sure
I like
do.
the family trips because, especially as the kids are getting older, um, because you get them, especially my kids, since they're homeschooled. It's good to get them out of the house and get them seeing this great country of ours. We want to take them to Mexico, but yeah, family trip for sure.
Yeah, one of my best memories, 12 years old, we drove from California to Baltimore, and we took the southern
Mm,
route and then went straight across the middle of the US coming back. And that was amazing to see the different landscapes, and the different,
yeah.
summertime. So it was hot everywhere, but, you get
Right.
into the South, the humidity and stuff like that.
Yeah.
The different truck stops and the food and the people's accents. It
Right.
was really, really great. And by the way, let's see, we left mid-June and we drove coast to coast, no AC.
Mm.
That was tough. That was real tough. And we were in Texas at a truck stop. My dad puts the van in park, and the rearview mirror inside on the windshield, the glue
Yeah.
melted and it just fell on the dashboard. I was like, "Get the hell out of Texas now!" It was
Why
hot.
Baltimore of all places?
That's where my mom is from, so it was. She
Oh,
wanted to go back and see her family, but it's not the Baltimore that we get today. There was some of
West
it. It wasn't
Baltimore.
as bad as it is today, but
Yeah.
yeah, we went back there to see my mom's family.
Gotcha.
What do you say? Well, no, no. Let me do the other one. Which kid is most like you?
Mm. That's a really good question. Um, I see myself in different parts of all my kids. Um, the stubborn, uh, the stubborn, um, kind of questioning everything of my oldest, my 10-year-old,
Mm-hmm.
the outdoor, explorative, um, you know, curiosity of my youngest son who's 9. Um, I see different qualities of myself in all of my kids, really. So
Yeah,
that's a hard question. I don't know if I have an answer for that one.
it's a delicate balance when you have kids who question, kids who have strong personalities. You
Right.
want that to maintain. You want them to question authority and question life,
Hmm.
in a respectful manner. You don't want to be
Right.
bad students or anything, but or bad employees, but
Hmm.
you want that inquisitive nature. You want that stand up for themselves and don't take any
Right.
crap. But when it's time to go to bed and take a bath, that's not when I need. That's not when I need the stubborn
Yeah.
questioning everything.
I need you to
Not right
fall in
now,
line at that time.
please. And uh, what do you say if you had a minute? You had 60 seconds, and you see a young 23-year-old Chad getting into the plumbing business and everything, learning it, being an apprentice and a journeyman and all
Mhm.
that stuff. You have 1 minute. You're going from your car to the work site, that prison job you were telling me about, the 5 stories, and you have to go to the
Yeah.
journeyman and ask them what supplies they need for the day. What do you say to a young Chad who's going to that job site? What do you say to him? Maybe words of wisdom or words of encouragement.
Man, I would just tell him, look at every opportunity, like look at every moment, be it good or bad, as a learning opportunity, because the information that you're learning now, not only on the job but in life, will help you in the long run if you just look at it as a teachable moment. That's what I would tell him, because that was true of me. I mean, there were a lot of things that I learned, that when I was coming up in the plumbing industry, that I still lean on today, to get me through certain situations, um, good or bad, better or worse. You know, what I mean, there's business decisions that I made that weren't, the best decisions, but it was good for me to go through those experiences to make me a better businessman and to, help me up my game, so to speak. And so I think what happens is people tend to, um, go through tough seasons, and they um, they regret the decisions that they made that led to those tough decisions, um, and it breaks them. But I never look at a situation as a moment that broke me. I look at it as something that made me a better man. So that's what I would tell him, is like, don't let life defeat you. Look at every moment as a teachable moment.
And
So
buy Amazon stock. Buy a bunch of Amazon stock. Get in on the ground floor.
yeah, get
Um,
in on the ground floor.
that's all I got, Chad. Thank you, man. I really appreciate this. What a great conversation, man. And I will put all of the links to buy Uncle Tom 1 and 2, any social media links you have. I'll put all that stuff in the description section. So you guys make sure you get in there, click those links, get those movies, follow them on social media. And I have the Uncle Tom 2 DVD in my DVD collection. And let me tell you, Chad,
Nice.
it's tough to get my DVD collection. I don't buy movies. I don't put movies in, in my collection. Like if you made it there, you're amongst some really good films that I really like and I really
Nice.
have a lot of respect for. So thank you,
We'll
Chad,
appreciate
for
that.
being here.
Is American History X in that collection?
No, it is not.
Okay.
But
Okay.
Man on Fire is. I like I like American History X. I think that's another movie that people should see because when he's in prison and he's talking to, I think it's can't remember the actor's name. No, it's not Joe Torre's brother, but I can't remember the actor who plays the black dude that he's in the laundry room with. And even somebody like him who is he's a real white supremacist, not the way they throw that word around, that title around willy-nilly today. He was a real white supremacist, and even he was changed by spending time with a person that he thought he hated, and it changed him. So all this racism crap and this nonsense and not liking certain groups and stuff, I think spending time with them and talking to them, you realize, oh, you're just like me, So it's very important to have these conversations and not follow this division that they're trying to put in America. And I don't think there is this big divide. I really don't. But again, thank you, Chad. I appreciate it. Uncle Tom 1 and 2, be on the lookout for number 3 when it's ready. And I thank you. And make sure you guys are here next week. I drop these interviews every single Monday. So this one I'm dropping, the one next week. I got some good ones coming up. This right here is one of my favorites so far. Thank you, Chad. I appreciate it. And make sure you guys stay tuned to Green's House.